So I was just explaining what you need to do in order to adopt an alternative approach to structure your gobbet that doesn't just go verse by verse. I pointed out the importance of picking out the key critical areas. You need to ensure a balance. Think ahead. What are the things that you need to speak about so that you don't speak so much about the other things that you've got no space left for them? If, for example, you were doing 1 Corinthians 8, 1-7, where basically the big critical issue comes in the last verse, you're going to get caught out if you dwell too much on the first few verses. You're not going to have enough time to talk about the use of the Shema in 1 Corinthians 8:6. You need to ensure a compromise between an exhaustive treatment of the text and a detailed one. You need to make sure you don't miss any big elements. However, if you try to cover everything in the text, you will tend to do a relatively undetailed analysis of each one. Whereas what you need to do in order to show your critical skill is to give a detailed analysis of a few texts rather than an exhaustive analysis, not detailed, of all of the elements of it. So you need to balance those two. Therefore, choose the right number of elements for commentary that you can give a detailed explanation. Avoid, on the one hand, trivial commentary on anything. So the kind of thing any old Tom, Dick and Harry could have said. Just don't do it. And avoid, on the other hand, missing anything of obvious critical interest. Remember, this isn't a Bible study. So leave the obvious bits. The bits which need no commentary, don't repeat them. If you're going to adopt a different approach, in fact, whatever you do, you need to have an introduction, you need to have a body, the main section, and you do need to have a conclusion. In the introduction, which most of you did, you need to give a little bit of context, what came before, where's it going next, how does this integrate with the flow of the argument. In the body, you obviously address the critical issues of the text, and it's great to have a bit of a conclusion. Now, it's a bit elusive what you might do in that conclusion, but something that captures the spirit of this particular text and perhaps points to its influence outside of itself. So whether that is, what is this text doing in the whole of the Pauline corpus? What significance does it have for the whole of the New Testament? Does it stand over against something? Is there a particular significance for later theology as it develops? Why do you think the examiners have chosen that text? It's nice to end with a very brief line of conclusion. Thirdly, be honest to the problems. What do I mean by this? I think if you have a high doctrine of Scripture, you might be inclined to shortcut the discussion about a thorny issue. So in the example of 1 Corinthians 7, you've got this question about whether Paul is anti-marriage, basically. And there are plenty of scholars out there who will say that. And in an attempt to defend Paul, we may be inclined not really to give sufficient voice to that particular perspective. So what we need to be on the guard against is pretending that there's no critical discussion to be had. If people are having a critical discussion about something, you need to engage in that. You need to present their arguments. So even if you don't think he's got anything against marriage, you do need to at least give voice to those who would say that so that you can then make the case. Don't jump straight to defending your position without actually articulating what the problems might be. In this particular case, Paul says, I'd rather that everyone was as I am. Fine. And finally, detail to go. What do I mean by this? Well, my little briefcase there. This is just a pointer to how you might approach your revision. It's great to have little portable snippets of information, that's the idea of the briefcase there, as you come into the exam. So, for example, a few of you referred to the peride at the beginning of the text and then wrote down the references. There's no reason why you can't learn the 4 or 5 or however many they are peride references. There's a little chunk, stick it in your briefcase, ready to go, so that as soon as a passage comes up, you just trot those out. And that applies to lots and lots of different things. There are lots of little nuggets of information that it's great to just have, because they're recyclable in lots and lots of different elements of the text. So that, and this is a prime example of them, so that whichever passage you get, you're more likely to be able to reproduce those little bits of information. the same goes for critical opinions. It's really useful in your revision to think, okay, here's a problem, what are the different positions? And to learn those things, as it were, to put into your little briefcase in terms of scholar name, Thistleton, position, realised eschatology, and perhaps a quote, if that's relevant, if there's a nice quote to go with it. Don't try and remember enormous quotes, but, a few lines, sometimes useful, a few words, sometimes useful. And don't forget detail. Try and avoid being vague. Things like mutuality in marriage is a countercultural tendency. Okay, that's a fair point. Much better, though, to say mutuality in marriage is distinctively countercultural in Paul's writing. Compare, for example, the writings of Epictetus, who sees women as nothing but bedfellows of men. There we've got some depth to your analysis, and it's not general, it's a bit more specific. Good, so those hopefully are the 4 things that will help you out. Make sure you don't just state a point. You present clear arguments, and then you analyse them clearly, and you come to a clear conclusion, and give reasons for that conclusion. Think about structure. Don't just go for a verse by verse. Be honest to the problems. If there are issues, give voice to those issues, even if you're going to then argue that they aren't actually issues. And finally, think creatively about how you can get little nuggets of information, little envelopes of thought that you can stick in your exam briefcase, as it were, which are then ready to go. You can pluck them out any time and slot them into your gobbets. And that's all. Thanks very much for all the hard work, and all the best in your exam next week.